Welcome to the Housing Shift. I'm your host, Rajendram. Before we get into today's episode, a quick word from our sponsor. Service Charge Pro is the platform helping housing providers fix messy, spreadsheet-based service charge processes. Service Charge Pro was built to make accuracy easier, compliance simpler, and to help rebuild resident trust. If you're in housing and service charges are a pain point, check out Service Charge Pro. Link in the comments below. Right, on to the episode. Okay, welcome to episode 5 of the Housing Shift. This episode is called No Talent, No Transformation, Finding and Keeping the Right People in Housing. With me today, I have Matt Baird. How you doing, Matt?
I'm all right, cheers. Raj, how are you?
Good, thanks. You've just come back from holiday, so I'm assuming you're swimming in emails and other things this week.
Yeah, I got back on Monday at 1 a.m. and by the time I kind of logged on at 7 a.m., having not had slept much, there was 783, and I was like, okay, and we're back.
Well, apologies for about 2 or 3 of those, but there we go.
No, absolutely fine.
Matt, as with many people, I've got to know you through the Social Housing Roundtable. We obviously joked when we sort of talked about you coming on the podcast that you do actually have a day job or two. Did you want to help the listeners and the viewers understand a bit more about what you do in the sector and what you've been doing over the past few years?
Yeah, no, I think the Social Housing Roundtable is the thing I'm most known for. We've got 4,500 members now. We meet every Tuesday online in platforms similar to this. But I guess the idea is to have as many people in the room as possible. Nearly episode 200 now, which is absolutely mad, seeing as we've been running this for so long. But it doesn't seem to be showing any signs of slowing down, which is fantastic. And Elaine Middleton has come on as a head of partnerships, which is great. But day to day, you're right. I work in recruitment. That's what I've been doing for the last 14 years. For the last 5 years or so, I've been self-employed, but partner with a team at Avalon, which is part of Spirehouse, which has been a fantastic kind of partnership for me. And we've recruited everything from those customer facing roles right through to exec directors, most recently an assistant director at Walsall Housing Group, amongst others. And they've been really, really fascinating to work on as well. But I've always said, what I wanted to do was make sure that when recruiting, I did it a bit more ethically. I think agencies understandably get a bad rep because quite often they're seen as just out there to make money. And so I was always about, what more can I do if I'm using tenants' money to form a business? What can I do with it? So not only have we got the Social Housing Roundtable, which is free for everybody to attend, and it's every Tuesday online at Zoom on 11 o'clock, a little plug there. But I'm also chair of the board for a local housing association and charity called Spring Housing. We recently partnered with St Anne's, and I'm on St Anne's hostel side. I'm one of the founding members of the Exempt Accommodation Forum in Birmingham, and I'm the chair and host of the Supported Housing Network. And all of those roles are voluntary. But again, it's just about what can we do to give back. It does unfortunately mean that quite often there's very little time left in my week, but that's part of the joy of the social housing world as well, as you'll know yourself, Raj.
No, for sure, for sure. And I just want to say, 200 episodes is such a momentous achievement. And I know you didn't set out to get recognition for it or get a certificate for getting 200 episodes in, but there's so much to be said about the kind of the community that you've built there. And I've tuned into a few and noticed that there are a lot of the same people that do come to it, and I think that's amazing. That and I rarely get a chance to join the meeting live, so I'll catch up on it. But I can see a lot of the same faces are there, dedicating that time for it. So it obviously means a lot to them, and I think that's a really amazing thing.
Yeah, we've got, and it helps that we've got tenants, we've got chief execs, we've
Mm,
got consultants, we've got those staff that are out and about with customers every day. We've got senior managers, heads of service. So it's a really broad spectrum, and it's about hearing from people who aren't in the same position as yourself. It's about hearing disagreements, about
mm.
remembering how to have a conversation with someone that doesn't necessarily share the same mindset as you, and being able to have a difference of opinion with them in a respectful way. And I think it's a skill that in Britain certainly, and I mean you see it in America as well, I think we've lost a little bit.
Absolutely.
But I think it's so, so important to be able to sit there and disagree with someone respectfully without it becoming, oh, you disagree with me, therefore you're a bad person, rather
Yeah.
than, okay, you see things differently. Let's see if there's a middle ground. And it's been brilliant, but I've also learned so much. And you're right, there was never an intention to get anywhere near 200 episodes.
Mm.
Never mind, goodness knows what's coming next. But I think it's been built from those people who come along every week. Those tenants who suddenly feel like they can have a voice, but also those execs who want to kind of, as so many people do, they just listen back and go, well, actually, that's really interesting. I hadn't thought about it that way. And if we can help change people's mindset just a little bit, or give people a takeaway day to day, then all the better for it.
Absolutely. So for today's conversation, the crux of what we want to get into is how do we find, brilliant people, and how do we keep them in the housing sector? And your background in recruitment, your work with the roundtable, and your other voluntary roles gives you such a broad view over the sector, but with a specific focus around this particular topic. So at the moment, we're at a pivotal moment in housing. Maybe it always feels like we're in a pivotal moment, but it certainly feels like it at the moment, where there's so much going on. There's so much to sort out. There's lots of new challenges, lots of opportunities. Why do you feel like now more than ever it's so important to find these people and keep them in our sector?
I think and you'll know this, and so many people will still say, oh, I fell into housing, I didn't know about the sector, I hadn't heard about the sector. And I think that's something that has never really changed or gone away. And I think we're finding more and more that we are losing staff quicker than we're hiring staff. And I think it's really, really important to acknowledge that. I've had a number of conversations this week around mergers, around people who are going through mergers, or businesses going through mergers, and they feel the culture has changed, or they feel the culture is going to change from what they can see. So they want to leave and move to a different business, and want to go back to a more community-led model. We are seeing less and less small providers because the bigger businesses are having to merge all the time. So I think that's having an impact. But I think more generally, when we're looking at social housing and the sector we've got, it underpins everything. We talk about Maslow's hierarchy of needs. We talk about anything and everything out there going, if you haven't got a home, nothing else can fall into place. You can't get a bank account. You can't really get a job as easily. You can't have somewhere to call your own, to go and change and go and just get ready for a job interview, or whatever those things might be. You can't earn a living and create a life without a home. And social housing in its original guise was absolutely set up to do that. I do think we've made a number of brilliant decisions, a number of awful decisions through the years, and a lot of those have been politically led. Trying to keep people in a sector which everyone knows is there, and you'll know yourself when you say, oh, I do stuff in the social housing sector. Quite often people who are outside of it go, I don't know what that is.
Yeah.
They do. They absolutely do. They just don't acknowledge it for what it is. And those are two very, very different things. And I think we're in a situation at the moment where if we don't start really promoting what the business is all about, and what the sector does, and how much the sector literally impacts society day to day, we're just going to keep spinning our wheels. Because as some of the things you attested to there, because of that amount of change going on at the moment, and we'll definitely touch on it again, but the amount of change going on so consistently at the moment, people are burning out and leaving and just going, I can't keep doing this. And we have to find a way to support people better, take some of that workload off, change some of the ways that we're thinking about and discussing work, because otherwise it's just going to keep getting harder and harder.
I think it's a similar story for you. For me, when I first joined the sector, a recruiter called me up and said, "Oh, I've got this potential role at a housing association," and I was kind of like, "Well, what is that?" And I had no idea, And it was a 15,000 home size housing association, so not an insignificant one. It was 20 minutes from my house, and I just had no idea that this entity existed and what it did and the people it helped. So, and there were people in properties that lived near me, and I just had no idea about this. Yeah, I know it was a similar story with yourself.
Yeah, I was working for an agency. They'd hired me, but I didn't have a desk or a team I was allocated to yet. And they said, we want you to work in social housing. And I literally, and it's almost become infamous, the first question I asked was, how do you recruit for a tower block? I don't understand. Then you just start to deep dive. But what's also fascinating, and you just said there, like 15,000, not insignificant. 15,000 homes. I think because there's so often like we're going, oh yeah, we've got less than 20,000, or we're a mid-size. But that's 15,000 homes. It's huge as a business. And yet we sometimes do, and I think it's Neil Goodrich reminds me all the time, there are 80% of social housing providers have less than 1,000 units. And we need to acknowledge that those businesses are out there and working just as hard with far less financial support. but also from a staffing perspective, that it's just as difficult to recruit for those guys as it is for the big guys.
And so, with some of the causes of burnout and increased expectations, it feels like at the moment there's so much regulation change going on, and there's going to be more. What kind of impact have you seen from that across the kind of recruitment in the sector or the retention?
I think it's really, really interesting. I think we're in a position at the moment where, when I first started recruiting in housing, the Welfare Reform Act had just come in. And it was this huge monumental shift, and everything was shifting, and people had to adapt so many different teams and create teams and everything else that went with it to make it work. And everyone had a bit of a panic. And although it had lots of subsections, everyone knew what it was. Now we're getting so many things. So we've had new regulations, new consumer regulations, our hours laws just around the corner. Never mind all of the changes we've had over the last 2-3 years. And you're right, it's unrelenting. There are two areas for me. One is that people have found actually the roles they were doing, they'd rather be doing something slightly different within housing. So I've spoken to people who work in HR, I've spoken to people who work in kind of customer facing roles, I've spoken to people who work in managerial roles, and so many people have turned around and said, actually, the bit I love, and even those are 3 different areas, the bit I love is the impact on the customer piece. So I want to do customer engagement piece, I want to do resident engagement work, I want to do that kind of piece where I want to focus. So lots of people are gravitating towards that, which is an area that has massively increased because of the TSMs and because of everything else that's come along around it. Yet those are roles that are still quite new in some aspects to housing, so those teams are still growing. So that's really, really interesting and fascinating to watch. I think what's also become absolutely apparent, which is something that a number of us, including myself, have been banging the drum about for years and not really getting anywhere, and now everyone's having a blind panic about it, which is anything to do with asset management or building safety or regulations on fire or whatever it might be. We are so understaffed. We don't have the workforce. We can highlight things like Brexit, which is always a bit of a polarizing topic in terms of whether it was right to leave or not. But the one thing that's absolutely apparent is we lost staff, and we lost a lot of very, very good staff. We've got a massively aging workforce in that area particularly. With many, many facing retirement. We've got huge targets around net zero, unless there's a governmental change and they decide net zero doesn't exist anymore, obviously. But, at the moment, there are huge targets around net zero and making things more carbon neutral. For that, you need trained staff, and it's a niche skill to itself, and we aren't training enough people. And there's still that frustrating stigmatization that was there when I went to school, which was that if you were clever, then you went to sixth form or college and you went and got your degree, and then you went and worked in something which required a degree. And if you were struggling through school, then you went and did an apprenticeship and went and did a trade or anything like that. God, I wish I got a trade, because right now I'd be so employable. Or gone and done quantity surveying, or gone and done any of those. And I mean, that requires high levels of qualification, don't get me wrong, but gone into that kind of arena of building management and building safety and those kind of things, because right now those people are able to demand salaries that the housing sector actually can't afford. And that's another big, big issue. There was a provider who I've known for years, desperately after almost a surveyor, who was based in the Midlands but would happily travel nationally, because they couldn't afford anymore to keep paying consultancy fees for them to go and do it. The problem is the only area they can recruit from is the consultants, because there aren't enough now in social housing alone. So you're suddenly going, well, I can't afford 65, 75, 85,000 pounds for a surveyor, like a fully qualified RIC surveyor. I said, but then you can't get one, because when they qualify, they go to a consultancy and they're on huge day rates. So that's kind of one of the areas that we're really, really stuck for. But I think so much of it, and I know we'll come on to it in a bit, is around culture. You can keep hold of staff if your culture is great. You can keep hold of staff if you are a truly community-led business. And you can hire staff and you can attract staff if you can showcase you're a truly culture, a really good culture, and you have a truly community-led and customer-led business. Those things aren't always easy, and we aren't a sector that's particularly good at showcasing what we are good at either.
Thanks, man. Lots to unpack from that. So, obviously you mentioned the shortage of labour for so much of so many of the roles that we need to deliver on the need of the sector right now. You mentioned there about the aging workforce. What's your views on how we are trying, or not trying to recruit younger people into the sector?
I think the desire is there, is how I would phrase it. The desire is there, the will is there, the want is there. The actual practice maybe leaves a little bit to be desired. And because we're still recruiting in the ways we've always recruited, we're either going out to agencies, which is great for people like myself, but we're struggling to find trade staff too, unless you're like a specific trades recruiter, of which there are some very good ones out there. There are some that are less good, but that's by the by. The bigger part for me at the moment is just, you've had Ellie Holt's campaign around Choose Housing. You've seen places where people have set up a brand new PFP Thrive, which is great to see. You know, you've got people like Bell Group doing really, really interesting work in terms of developing their whole workforce by themselves through apprenticeships, because then they make sure they're trained to the right level and they're all becoming multi-skilled, and that's absolutely fantastic. I think the problem is how we're trying to connect with people who are like that next generation coming through. When you and I first looked at jobs, I imagine, try and cash your mind back, because for me, I think people always think I'm younger than I am, and I can promise you I'm not. My first job came out the newspaper. You know, we got the local paper through. It was dropped through the door every day. We had a flick to the jobs page. I think the first one was a paper boy, ironically, but then, you know, it was going out. And I think one of my first roles was working in Subway. And then I went and worked for Royal Mail Data Entry Centre, and all of those came through the job page. You know, came through the job page on the newspaper. Those people now aren't reading the newspaper in the same way. They're not engaging with media in that way in the same way. People look for jobs on LinkedIn. I think businesses sometimes go, "Why aren't we getting the traction from LinkedIn?" I said, "Well, how many people are following your page? Because if they don't see it, how are they going to know about it?" And those things are, you know, how we brand ourselves is a big one. The other side is about looking at how young people engage with media and what we're doing. And we've joked about it before, but it's becoming more and more vital that businesses utilize social media, and I don't mean Facebook, to promote roles and promote vacancies and promote what's going on. Snapchat is still huge. I found this out relatively recently. I thought that had been and gone and it wasn't around anymore. Apparently it's still absolutely massive. TikTok is obviously wildly huge at the moment as a platform. Instagram is a large business platform. There was a stat which came out which said something like, I can't remember the exact numbers or something like that, but something like 60 to 70% of young people these days are gaining the only news they get is from social media. They don't find it anywhere else. And that's the only way they engage with any form of media. So if we're not on there, if we're not showing what housing does, if we're not talking about the opportunities, if we're not showcasing the breadth of work out there and trying to find ways to engage in new ways, how's anyone going to find us? And a bit like you testified to at the beginning, you had no idea this business was around the corner. I would have had no idea around the housing providers working and delivering services around me if I wasn't in the sector. You know, and I know that because I've had friends and other people who are near me. I said, "Oh yeah, that's that provider there, just there." I said, "Oh really? Didn't know they were there." And they've lived here for years. They just don't know what that business actually is. And I think that's one of the biggest challenges we've got, is engaging with people in a new way. And we can't just keep relying on putting out adverts and going to schools and things like that, because whilst you'll get a few, eventually what you really want is, you've got to the end of school, I'm no longer having to go to these things anymore, right? What is it I want to do next? Who can help me? Who can start me on a new path? And particularly college leavers. How do we get people before they go to university? Because a lot of people we work in, you don't need a degree, and we'll help you through your qualifications and things along those lines, get your CIH qualification or whatever it might be. But there are ways to improve and to upskill whilst in work and not come out with £30,000-40,000 worth of debt. I think it's a much better career path for many people than they even knew, than they even realised was out there in the first place.
I think I mentioned to you before, one of my neighbours has got a son, 16, doing GCSEs, and she's battling with him at the moment because TikTok has basically told him he doesn't need to do his GCSEs. And she's literally like, "I'm losing this fight because all he responds to is TikTok." Now, that's not great, obviously, but we need to recognize, as you're saying, that this is how they consume information. And they consume information in short bursts, and it's got to be exciting. And, you know, we're not doing enough of that in the sector. Like I'm glad you said not on Facebook, because it just seems like the same old stuff is being pumped out to say, "Hey, we developed this scheme in here, and look how many units," triggering word for some, you know, units we built here. And it's like, this isn't going to pull people in. You know, we need to be doing something else here. And I feel as someone who, you know, I run a startup, that's my day job. We are excited, you know, it is exciting being in that atmosphere, and there's lots of other cool startups and SMEs in the space doing exciting stuff, but we feel like that story isn't being told enough. You know, it's very much that whole kind of grey, I don't know, blocks, social housing, like it's not being made to sound exciting enough. But I mean, Would you agree with
If
that?
if I see a post go up on LinkedIn about XYZ landlord has created a new service and opened it, I'm like, I know how much work's gone into that, and that's brilliant. But why are you putting it up there? Are you putting it up there just so that other landlords will give you a pat on the back? Are you putting it up there because you're proud of yourselves? Those things are fine. What's that doing? It's not really. There might be a few people who get excited by it, but most people are liking it because they feel like you should celebrate everybody's achievements rather than achieving anything. And I completely agree with you. It'd be much better to turn around and say, 25 new people have got homes because of the work we've done here. It would be to go, great, we've created 1,200 new units, or whatever it might be. I talk about this quite regularly. We have a number of people who come on and want to speak on the Social Housing Roundtable. They want to advocate their wares, they want to advocate what they're doing, and absolutely there's a space for that. And some of the work and some of the tech out there is revolutionising housing, and it's brilliant. You are much, much better at getting a customer to come along and say, this was our journey, and this is how that product helped, because that's what people are going to listen to. Because then also tenants are going to be able to say, oh, fascinating, so they brought them in and it made our lives better. Because that's the bit they want to hear. That's the bit that everybody really wants to get to the crux of, is how do we make things better for our tenants? Not for all landlords. I appreciate that might be triggering for some, but majority are genuinely trying to do that, or at least there are teams within all, I think, that are trying to do that for businesses. But I absolutely agree with you there, that we don't think, and I think this is partly because most people who work in housing, and it's not a bad thing, have never worked in sales or business development. At the end of the day, recruiting staff, talent acquisition, talent growth, all of this is sales and business development. Because it's about saying, how do I get the thing I'm trying to sell to, which in this point is people, how do I get them to buy into us? What is it we need to showcase for them to buy into us? And the key things for people at the moment, yes, okay, you got flexible hybrid working and all that kind of stuff, which is interesting in and of itself. But it's the culture of the business. It's, are you who you actually say you are, and how much impact can I have on supporting people? Because at the end of the day, this is a sector that still tries to and still will always attract people who care about people. We are a sector that thrives and requires people whose sole purpose is they want to help, and who are happy to take a lower salary, because most people in our sector can go and get more money in the private sector doing a similar job, who work in our space, who want to help people, and so want to know that the business they're moving to are actually doing that and not just saying that they're doing that. And that's how you get people to both join and stay. You know, there are people I've spoken to, and I can offer them a slightly better role and a few more thousand or whatever it will be, but either the culture isn't right, or where they are, they're so happy with the work they're doing, they're going, actually, you know what, right now I'd rather just wait and see if something comes up internally, because I don't think I'm going to find a better place than where I am. And that's worth more than a few £1,000. But I think it'll only take more and more people of all levels, managers, officers, directors, execs, leaving companies. Again, unfortunately, I'm seeing it post-mergers. And continually leaving because cultures are changing and they're not as community focused and all these kind of things. Then maybe people go, okay, maybe bigger isn't always a solution for social housing.
So you touched on there about purpose, which we'll come to shortly. You did also mention around championing our achievements and why we're not doing that enough. So I had Joe Williams on the podcast recently, who, I found out about Joe through his appearance on the Social Housing Roundtable.
Really like Joe. He's great.
Yeah, it's great. And I really enjoyed that episode. I think I've told you I've listened to it a few times. Really like what they've done at Settle. And when I had Joe on the podcast, the last question that I'll ask you and I ask every guest is, if you've got a magic wand, what could you change? And he said, I wish we could talk about things more. And I've been thinking about that a lot. And I remembered this time, and I'd been to a conference. It was a housing technology conference, and I'd come back from there, and I was talking to one of the organizations I work with, and I was talking to someone senior in technology, and I said, oh, this person who had left this organization has gone to another provider, and they've won this award. And they were quite negative about it, and they said, "Oh, he just likes chatting, talking about whatever he does." And I was like, "But they've done something really great there, and they're just being recognised for it." And I think that's fair, and they're sharing what they've done, and they've been very open about what and how they achieved that success. And I feel like there is that negative kind of connotation around talking about what you do.
There is, and there's also, for a sector that is always meant to be about how can we help the most people that we can, we are so competitive, it is unreal. It drives me crazy. And I don't know whether it's the same in other public sector services. I don't know whether NHS foundations are really angry if someone moves from one to another. But at the end of the day, if we've done a really good job and we've upskilled somebody and they are at a really good time in their career, but there's nowhere internally for them to go and they move to another provider, let's go, brilliant. Look how great a job we did because we made them good enough to go and get a job at another provider. And there are some companies that are excellent at doing this. And Walsall Housing Group are one. I was so happy when someone goes and gets a job somewhere else and they'll advocate for them and they'll say, look, this is someone, if something came back internally, we'd have them back and all that kind of, as long as they're a good member of staff, obviously. But others are, it just drives me crazy that they almost take it as a personal insult or a personal slight. And it's wild out there because we do the same. I mean, it doesn't help that we have so many awards nights. We have so many different things. So we're almost constantly put into competition with each other. Then you've got TSNs, which were meant to never be about competition, but absolutely we're about competition because then it's okay, who's the best? Am I at least not the worst? Am I better than these guys? Then we've got the new, obviously the grading systems and everything come out. Oh, well, we're C1, G1, V1, we're this, we're that. Oh, you're not. Oh, you're not particularly very good then, are you? Without knowing any of the context behind it, it's an instant way to judge each other. And I think so many of these issues and so many of these problems that are coming out of the sector at the moment is we're finding ways to judge each other more and more for what we're like as a business. And it's not Pepsi v Cola v Fanta v Sprite, whatever it might be. I think Fanta is owned by Coke, but you know what I mean.
Yeah.
We are all housing providers. And as Joe says, one of the reasons I really wanted Joe to come onto the roundtable was because they'd done something, it was different, it was innovative. Settle had really kind of pioneered this project that was trying something new and it was working. And it started with them acknowledging, actually, this isn't very good, and this is where we need to get to. My roundtable the other week with True Compliance coming on, one of the things Birmingham City Council came on and went, we were rubbish. We were doing, we were programming surveys to go out on buildings that had literally already been knocked down. The building didn't exist, and we were scheduling them to come out because our data wasn't good enough and we didn't know. It's acknowledging where we really are, and it's doing something to fix it or trying something to make change. And then it's going out and sharing that and saying, look, we're not hoarding this. We're not saying, great, look how great we are. But it's what it requires then is someone listening. And by listening, I don't kind of mean sit there, oh, that's good, and then that's it. Because that's what happens so often at conferences and it drives me crazy. If you have members of staff, and I was talking to our team about this recently in the recruitment world, if we have members of staff who we sent on a course and they went away and they got 2 days of training and learning everything else, and they came back and nothing had changed, you'd think, A, I've wasted my money, and B, right, what's going on here? Quite often at these conferences, because it's directors, execs, and chief execs going, who's holding them to account for the stuff that they've learned, understood, changed? Oh, you've had a day and a half, 2 days out of the business. Brilliant. You've probably had a very good drink up alongside it. I hope you had a lovely time. I hope you've networked like crazy. Other than improving your own network, what have you brought back that we can do, and how are we going to implement and change that, and where do we start? Because I don't think there's enough of those conversations going on. So it's on one side, people aren't listening to each other enough. And when they are listening, they're not doing enough with it. And I think if we got better at that, we definitely would get staff staying more. Our retention would improve and increase because businesses would see that, people in those businesses would see that, look, we're a business that changes. When we hear something good, we go for it, we run with it. People love that. Absolutely love that. I mean, 13 Group are excellent at this. They went to the name will come to me in a moment, but she was saying how they'd introduced a new policy because they'd heard about it somewhere else and stuff like, oh, this is really good. What's this? And there was full support and they made sure it worked and they teething problems together and they got through it. And now they're a much better business for it. Great. Lovely. Absolutely fantastic. Why aren't we seeing more of that? And then when it does work, why are we then not hearing them at conferences going, yeah, we learned from these guys because we had it last year. And this is our journey of going on that one. Because there should always be a follow-up. There should always be, I'd love to see more at big national conferences. Hi, yeah, we came here last year and heard this. Yeah. We've started that journey. We're only 6 or 9 months into it, but actually this is what we found already. And these are some of our teething problems so that you can learn from us too. Because that's the gold dust. That's the stuff you need to get hold of to really make change. But we're still, and I think society has impacted this. I think we're more risk averse than we've maybe ever been. We are so scared as a sector of getting it wrong. Half the time we don't start. And that's concerning. It's understandable, but it needs to change.
I think the media does not help in that respect.
No, it doesn't.
The attitude and the motivation behind, and I'm not necessarily saying the media within housing, but I'm just saying a lot of the widespread media creates this pressure And some of it's warranted. Obviously with Awab's law coming around the corner is a truly horrendous thing to happen, and people need to be held to account, and that needs to be discussed. But the way that the media portray things and create these pressures on housing providers and CEOs does create this kind of blinkered thinking or this blinkered mindset maybe, where it's like we just need to not mess anything up and just kind of keep it steady and status quo, and otherwise we're going to end up in the papers. And I see that in service charges a lot. They're terrified to do anything and they don't want to talk about things because of
what if it goes wrong, and what if something happens. But it took we talk about TSMs and that kind of thing, we talk about Awab's law, but it took Blackenhall fire, Grenfell Tower, Awab Ishak dying, the lady who was left in her flat for 3 years and died and been left. It took all of these things for this to finally come into place. It's taken huge amounts of tragedy to get to where we've got now. And I couldn't agree more. I think there's always like a word of the year for the Social Housing Roundtable. And last year was definitely culture, and the year before was probably accountability. And those things are still really ringing true. But this year the word seems to be brave. Are people genuinely going to be brave enough to make change? And one of the things I love about Amanda at Rochdale Borough-wide Housing, and I don't particularly know her, I've heard her speak a few times. But she's joined after the death of Awab Ishak. She has taken full accountability and responsibility for that. It is right through the business. She'll talk very openly about where things went wrong, where things have improved, where things are still needing to improve, and what they're doing. And when you hear her speak, and I haven't worked within the business, but from what I understand of people who have, that's someone that I will stay in a business for. That's someone who, if they start saying, someone down the road offers me $5,000 for a similar role, I'm not going anywhere. This is someone I'm going to bat for because I feel we're making change and we're doing something about it. The sector needs more of that. Aileen Evans used to be another one that was superb. I remember Quajo called out something about Grand Union a number of years ago on one of their properties on X, or Twitter, or whatever it was at the time. She turned around and said, she was the first response, or maybe not the first, but she was right up near the top, and said, I know what this is about. I'm the chief exec of the housing provider that you're talking about. When can you meet? Because I'd love to talk about this. There are mitigating circumstances, but even still, we need to talk. And that's the chief exec going out publicly on social media saying, it's me, it's my responsibility, and I'm here. Not, hey, look, asset manager, can you go and look at this? Or housing manager, can you go and look at this? That's a leader leading. And I think the sector needs more of it, and needs more people who are willing to be that bit brave and put their name out there and go, you know what? No, it's fine, because I have faith in my staff and my team that there are reasons behind this. And if there's not, then we'll fix it, because mistakes are going to happen when we have 10, 15, 20,000 homes. There's probably going to be one sometimes, unfortunately, that slips through the net. That's the nature of housing. That's the nature of the sector. It's just that when you hear about it, what you can do about it. And that's where too often we fall short. People have heard about it, and heard about it, and heard about it, and heard about it, and still nothing's being done.
Okay, so we've got lots of practical steps there for providers, for CEOs, in how to try and help create these environments where people want to join the sector and people want to stay there. Coming back to that question, why, and you talked a bit about purpose and how as housing providers there is a core purpose there to fulfill a core need for people, and a lot of the people there will echo that purpose or share that purpose. Do you feel that directly translates into the employee experience, though?
I think for those who are engaging most day to day with customers, as long as they feel heard, and that's a difficult one. Going back to Amanda again, I remember her saying that one of the biggest things they've had to change, and one of the things that came out with the report, was that the housing officers and trades operatives knew what were going on. No, there were homes in massive need of disrepair. The execs weren't hearing it. For whatever reason, the messages weren't going up the chain, or when they were being ignored. So if you are truly a business that can listen to your staff who are out with your customers every day, you will be a much better business. Hands down, full stop, without question. An amazing thing, again, and I know I've already referred to WHG, they have filled their customer service team with either tenants or ex-tenants. Brilliant. Because they can understand what's going on and be able to relay that. And then there is processes to make sure that those reports get all the way up to execs, so that is always carried through. So when you can do that, and you can constantly showcase that how your customers are truly feeling is being heard all the way through the business, then absolutely, it's fantastic. I think the biggest challenge, or one of the biggest challenges, outside of the one I just referred to, where you can get the information but nobody's listening to it, are teams that aren't customer facing. So we always talk about more broadly how brilliant the sector is at being broad in terms of there's roles for HR, for finance, for tech, for asset teams, for all of these, for tech solutions, whatever it might be. There's lots and lots of different, projects going on all the time. The world of remote working, and this is potentially a bit, controversial, I feel has massively damaged cultures for a lot of businesses, particularly for back office staff. So if you are in a role where you joined social housing or you joined a social housing provider because you wanted to feel the worth of what you were doing, and you're working full time at home and you're never around customers in the same way, you aren't hearing those stories all the time. And again, this comes down to your policy and how good your setup is for remote working or for hybrid working and all the rest of it. But I'm seeing more and more businesses at the moment finding or trying to find ways to get people back into the office more. And a lot of people are pushing back saying, I don't want to, I'm great from home, I'm this, that, and the other. And I get that. The flexibility that COVID provided has really opened up people's lives in ways that it couldn't before. But we have all done jobs somewhere in our career which we hated in terms of the actual work, but we stayed because of the people that we worked with, or we stayed because of the purpose of the work that we were doing, regardless of how good the job itself was. Housing has relied on that for years. It's relied on people who are on 35-hour-a-week contracts doing 40, 45-hour-a-week work. That isn't okay. I'm not saying it's a good thing. I'm saying, but the bare face of it is that if everyone in housing only did the hours they were contracted to, the sector would probably collapse in a week, because we don't have enough people to fulfill the contracts in the right ways. And we're in this cycle at the moment of promoting hybrid working and remote working to attract staff, and then realizing when they start that those staff haven't integrated into the business, so needing them in more than maybe they were before. And I'm hearing from people looking for work way more than I was 2-3 years ago. Look, I'm happy being in 2-3 days a week. I want to be around people again. I've been on my own for years. I want to be back around people again. And we have to get that social purpose embedded into everyone in the company if we're going to keep staff remembering why they're working and the way they're working. I remember speaking to a company. They were recruiting in their finance team, and they said, well, one of the things we always do is every quarter or every 6 months, it's one of the two, where we take all of our back office teams around our schemes just to let them, meet residents and see what's going on, or they go out and see one of our new services or whatever it'll be. But we do it, and we make sure we do it with our back office staff, because otherwise they never go out. Because similarly, I've spoken to HR teams who've never visited a social housing property. And there's no one on the team who's been out to see the stock. Because why would they, is the obvious question. They don't need to. They do, if you're going to get them to buy in and you're going to get them to understand the work they're doing, and they're going to understand, A, how it impacts the work they're actually doing day to day, which is really, really important, particularly in finance. But also remind people why they're there, that this is what you're here for. This is the job this is the company you wanted to be part of, and this is why we're proud to have you as part of what we're doing. The impact that can have is huge, absolutely huge. And there's small little steps that we can be doing, but often don't, because we don't have the time. What I will say to anyone listening is, what you don't have the time for is to recruit. You don't have the time to hire new staff. You don't have the time to embed new staff in the way that you hope you would. That bit of time there is going to be much quicker than doing a recruitment process, and it's going to be a lot cheaper. Admittedly, weirdly, that's awful business from me. I should be saying to everyone, no, keep everyone, hide away, give them all back, and then I'll keep my business going. What I want is the best people in housing who care about housing working in the sector. There's a lot of people I would quite like to see leave the sector, but that's a whole different conversation. But what it is, if we're trying to keep people who care about what we're doing, we have to give them the chance to remember why they're doing what they're doing, because otherwise you just get isolated from the reason that you're there in the first place.
I think you're relying on that whole lesson that you shared earlier about people listening and not taking action. That's why they start.
And this is it. Yeah. Nothing I'm saying, most people will have heard a lot of what I've said before at some point, or may have heard it once and then forgotten it, or whatever it will be. Someone somewhere, and it comes back to that word of the year, that accountability piece. Who's going to be accountable for making sure this stuff gets done? Who's going to be accountable for making sure that actually these processes are followed up on, and that our services are run well, and that our tenants are truly listened to, and that our staff, our housing officers are heard, and all that kind of stuff, and our trades operatives, because your trades operatives see your staff, see your customers more than anybody else does. So listen to them and make sure that you really understand what they're saying, and empower them and train them to make sure they're feeding back, because that's a whole other area. But all of this stuff is culture. And the roles of exec directors, because it is execs, it's your execs, it's your chief execs. It's their role to drive this as a business model, because if you can get this right, you'll hire less, you'll spend less on recruitment, you'll have a more engaged staff team. Those that leave will be good staff who will tell their friends, come and work for, I'm leaving, you should come and have a look at this, because everyone in housing knows everyone in housing. You come across your colleagues all, in other businesses all the time. if I'm leaving somewhere as an officer and I know someone else who's a senior assistant or whatever it might be, hey, look, I'm going to be leaving soon. Go and have a word with them. Make sure you get your CV in. I'd love for you to apply. Great. There's an agency fee saved. All of this stuff is cyclical, and we just sometimes don't think of the bigger picture. We don't spend now to save later, and you'll know that from the tech side yourself. We'll keep doing what we've always done because those who are in senior leadership roles, that wasn't how it was done when they were there. So they go, we don't need to. I know how it's done. I remember what it was like. Nobody in an executive position right now has ever done the job of a modern housing officer. Nobody. Because the job of the housing officer has changed so much. And that mindset just needs to change. So we have to listen more.
Absolutely.
Sorry, soapbox. I'll get off the soapbox.
Oh, no. I loved it. I loved it. I mean, just thinking about my own experience as someone that has been in back office teams, started out in finance and then moved to tech. And I've been in the sector 18 years, and it's only in the last 3 that I've realised I've had meaningful interactions with residents. And I'm purpose driven. Essentially quit working to start this startup because I really believe in doing this and fixing this problem. There's lots like me in the sector, and I thought, wow, that's a real shame that in that 15 years, I love working in the sector that I stumbled into, but it wasn't. And I'm not saying this is across every site, but maybe from what you said, it is quite widespread. There is a lack of connecting back office staff to residents, and I'm not saying that you're necessarily going to take meet a resident and think, okay, I can make a direct connection between what I'm doing, processing invoices or I don't know, upgrading some servers and whatnot, but just having that connection with the people that the organization is trying to help. For most people, that is going to give you some purpose and some motivation, and I believe that. And
Completely agree.
It's a shame that didn't happen. So that's
and the more you have of that, the more likely you're to stay. You're more likely, if you felt that so strongly whilst in a business, that's one of the businesses you're in, you may not have left if there'd been enough of it whilst there.
Exactly.
And yet there isn't. So we wonder why people leave. And this is, and this is nothing against yourself or so many other consultants I know. We lose so many good people from our sector who become consultants or set up their own businesses because they don't have that interaction, or they aren't heard, or their voice isn't heard in the same way. And it's so frustrating because you'll meet them all at conferences and everything else, and yet every single one of them at one point loved working in housing, and now they work adjacent to housing. That's a whole lost workforce there. And we have to do something to give people enough reasons so they don't feel that the only way they're going to get heard and listened to is by leaving and coming back.
So Matt, we're on to the last question. Tradition on the podcast, we give each guest a magic wand and say not a magic wand to fix everything in housing. That would be amazing. Although my last guest decided to have 4 magic wands, which was great. But if we could stick to one, that would be great also. If you could fix something, one thing tomorrow, you wave the magic wand and it would help attract and keep brilliant people in the sector, what would it be?
Trying to see if I can swing 2 into 1. No. So I mean, for me, the one that always came to mind when you first asked me this question was to reintroduce and to properly introduce housing as a qualification in schools again. To bring housing in as a optional GMVQ or GCSE. I don't know what they're called these days. I'm too old. Sorry. I remember my brother doing a GCSE in public services or something, a GMVQ in public services, and it was police, fire, force, and the armed forces. Why housing isn't there? Why housing isn't just brought in as a qualification? It's so broad, so broad. You could easily bring it as a qualification and run a 5-year course in it and still not cover all of it. So I'd love to see that. And I think the way that you get people to engage with it and understand it and promote it is something that the sector has banged on about for years, but never done, which is in the same way that we have one for the Army and the NHS and the Navy and whatever else it will be, these big national campaigns, advertising campaigns. Just do one for housing. There's enough money. There is, particularly amongst the big providers, to do a national campaign, come together, listen, collaborate, work together, pool a bit of cash, and do a national advert on it and say, look, young people who are looking for a change of career, people who are toward the end of their career, we're open, we're listening, we're here. Come and engage with us, because there is a place for you. There is a spot for you. and we want to hear what you're talking about. You know, we want to know who you are, and we want to know why you care. And if you can get young people to understand that early, so they pick it as a GMVQ, as a GCSE, whatever the qualification might be, you'll find that suddenly you've got this pool of people coming through who have the behaviours that we need. And that's what it's really all about, is recruiting and behaviours. They have the behaviours, they have the ethics, they have the attitude. Great, let's just teach them housing. Because we overcomplicate just how difficult housing is as a sector, when really the core stuff isn't as hard as being the right kind of person for it. So yeah, for me, it'd be the qualification and getting it into schools a lot earlier on.
That's it. And two really practical and achievable steps. So hopefully someone's listening and going to take action. Matt, it's been awesome having you on. Really
Thanks,
appreciate
Raj.
it. And looking forward to speaking to you in a couple of weeks.
Yeah, well, I'll see you at conference very soon. Thanks, Raj.
Yeah,
Cheers.
absolutely. Thanks, everyone. Bye bye.
Bye bye.